Why was the commander standing in the smoke with his hand raised in a salute to a medic kneeling in the dirt? Gunpowder still hung in the cold air of Kunar province. The mountains had gone quiet in that strange way they sometimes do after violence, when the shooting stops but the danger hasn't quite decided to leave. Sloane Harker didn't look up. She knelt beside a wounded operator whose blood soaked through the gravel beneath him. Her hands were steady. One pressed a trauma dressing deep into the man's thigh wound. The other held her rifle angled toward a dark doorway 20 meters away. Her voice was calm. "Stay with me," she said quietly. "You're going to feel pressure." Around her stood 3 Navy SEALs who had spent most of their careers in places like this. Men who had seen firefights that would never appear in official reports. Yet all 3 of them were staring at the small woman in the dirt. They weren't staring because she was panicking. They were staring because she was. Heavy footsteps approached through the dust. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss stepped out of the smoke. 19 years in special operations had carved something sharp into his face, experience worn thin by responsibility. He stopped 3 feet from Sloane. She didn't acknowledge him. She finished securing the bandage, checked the pulse, adjusted the tourniquet, all while keeping the rifle trained on the doorway. Only when she finished did Voss slowly raise his right hand. And he saluted her. 8 silent seconds passed. The operators didn't move. Because the story of that salute had started 8 years earlier, in a quiet town outside Fort Bragg. And none of them yet understood why the woman they had laughed at 3 days ago was the most dangerous person on that mountain. Why had Sloane Harker stopped touching rifles for 2 years after her father died? Fayetteville, North Carolina, lived and breathed the military. Helicopters thundered across the sky at dawn. Soldiers filled grocery stores and gas stations. Every neighborhood carried the quiet rhythm of deployments. Sloane grew up in that rhythm. Her father, Daniel Harker, was Army Special Forces, a quiet man with winter-colored eyes and a patience that seemed almost endless. He began teaching her to shoot when she was 10. Not because he wanted his daughter to fight. Because he wanted her to understand the world. Every Saturday morning, they drove out to a wide, empty field south of town. The rifle was an old Remington 700 he had carried on deployments. Before every shot, he would say the same 3 words. Slow, steady, sure. He never raised his voice. If Sloane rushed a shot, he simply made her breathe again and start over. "A bullet doesn't care how excited you are," he would say gently. "It only cares if you're patient." For 8 years, those mornings became their ritual. Until October 2001. Sloane was 18 and 3 weeks into college when the knock came on her mother's door. A soldier stood there. A chaplain beside him. They held a folded flag. Her father had been killed in Afghanistan under classified circumstances. The explanation was careful, rehearsed, incomplete. Sloane drove home that night. She and her mother sat at the kitchen table until dawn without speaking. The rifle remained in the hallway cabinet. For 2 years Sloane never touched it. Instead, she enlisted in the Navy. Not for revenge. For something quieter. Her mother never asked her not to become a soldier, but Sloane carried the unspoken promise anyway. She would save lives. Not take them. She trained as a Navy corpsman. And she was extraordinary. Instructors wrote the same comments in her evaluations again and again. Unusually calm under pressure. Exceptional clinical instincts. But sometimes they noticed something odd. During tactical simulations, Sloane studied the battlefield like a chess player. As if medicine was only part of how her mind worked. She kept the Remington rifle in the back of her closet. And she kept the 3 carved words in her memory. Slow, steady, sure. For 6 years, she kept that promise to her mother. Then in April 2009, the Navy sent her to Afghanistan. And everything changed. Why did the SEALs laugh when they first met her? Bagram Airfield looked like a place assembled by urgency rather than design. Concrete barriers, dusty vehicles, prefabricated buildings scattered across the base like pieces of a half-finished puzzle. Sloan arrived with a duffel bag, a medical kit, and orders assigning her to SEAL Team 3. She was 26, and she was the lowest-ranking person in the room. The team gathered for their briefing. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss stood at the head of the table, studying her personnel file longer than necessary. Senior Chief Decker Rains spoke first. "You're the medic." "Yes, Senior Chief." He glanced at her small frame and set the file down. "Last thing we need out here is a babysitter." The room went quiet. Sloan didn't react. Instead, she asked calmly, "What's your blood type?" Rains blinked. "O positive." "Good to know." She sat down. Across the room, Chief Cullen Shaw, the team's sniper, watched her without speaking. Ward Pilgrim McCreary, their explosives specialist, offered the only handshake. "Good to have you, Doc." "I'm not Doc yet," she said. He grinned. "You will be." Their mission sounded simple. 3 days in the mountains conducting surveillance on Taliban logistics routes near the Kunar River. Observe. Record. Do not engage. But mountains have a way of changing simple plans. Within hours of movement, Sloan had already noticed things about the men around her. Voss moved with the quiet precision of someone nearing the end of a long career. Rains was exactly as capable as his reputation suggested. And Shaw had been watching her since they left the base, as if waiting for something. The first moment came the next morning. McCreary developed a splitting headache during a rest stop. He hadn't mentioned it, but Sloan noticed the subtle signs in his breathing and posture. "Drink this," she told him, handing over electrolytes. "Altitude headache. If you ignore it, you'll lose balance later." He drank it. 2 hours later, he touched her shoulder and nodded once. No words, but respect had begun. Rains noticed too. He simply stopped making jokes. That evening, Sloan spotted 14 fighters moving along a route the intelligence briefing hadn't predicted. She watched them for 38 minutes before waking Voss. "They're avoiding the valley floor," she explained calmly. "They know which routes we're watching." Voss studied the empty trail, then looked at her again. "Good eyes, Harker." It was the first time he used her name. The second moment came on the third day. An ambush. Gunfire erupted from the slopes while the team was packing gear. Sloan grabbed McCreary's carrier handle and yanked him behind a rock before the second burst of bullets struck their previous position. "How'd you know another burst was coming?" he asked later. "Short first burst," she said. Nervous shooter's double tap." Rains walked beside her in silence for a while. "Where'd you learn that?" She answered simply, "My father." That night, under a sky filled with cold mountain stars, Commander Voss made a satellite call. "She's operational," he said quietly. A voice on the other end asked, "Does she know?" Voss looked toward Sloan sitting alone by the fire. "No," he replied. "Not yet." Because the truth was something no one on that team understood. The mission hadn't been built around intelligence. It had been built around her. And somewhere in those mountains was a man who knew exactly why. Why did Sloan stay silent when she discovered one of the SEALs was secretly transmitting signals to the enemy? The debrief after the mountain patrol lasted 2 hours. Coordinates, observations, standard military procedure. But later that night Sloan found something unusual in the satellite communication logs. A signal, short, 11 seconds, sent from a personal device, not encrypted with the team systems. The frequency belonged to insurgent coordination networks. She stared at the device identifier. She knew exactly who carried it. Senior Chief Decker Rains. Sloan didn't report it. Not yet. Because suspicion wasn't enough. She needed certainty. 2 days later, they received a new mission. Target Viktor Volkov, a former Russian intelligence officer turned black market information broker. He possessed documents revealing American intelligence networks across Central Asia. If sold, people would die. The orders were simple: intercept, terminate. But when Sloan saw Volkov's photograph, something stirred in her memory. 3 years earlier, she had accessed a restricted file about her father. One phrase had remained burned in her mind. Last known handler contact. The handler's name had been redacted. Until now. Because the man in the photograph looked very familiar. And something inside Sloan whispered a terrible possibility. That the man who knew what happened to her father was still alive. Could a medic really make a 700-yard sniper shot in the dark? The operation began just before midnight. Shaw established sniper overwatch on a ridgeline. The rest of the team moved toward an old stone building where Volkov waited with bodyguards. Everything was perfectly positioned. Until the unexpected shot came. Shaw's voice crackled in their radios. Overwatch down, shoulder hit. Without their sniper, the team was blind. Volkov was already moving toward the exit. Voss's voice cut through the radio. Harker, can you take the shot? The distance was 760 yards. Wind shifting across the valley. Sloan was already opening a hidden compartment in her pack. Inside was a disassembled Macmillan TAC-3 .38 sniper rifle. Rains and McCreary stared as she assembled it with calm mechanical precision. 55 seconds later the rifle was ready. She lay prone, calculated the wind, tracked Volkov through the scope. Breathe. Slow. Steady. Sure. She fired. The first shot missed. Wind shift. Stone shattered beside the doorway. Volkov ducked behind a wall. Sloan adjusted the calculation. Waited. Heart slowing. Second shot. The bodyguard collapsed instantly. Volkov stayed pinned behind cover. From behind her, the SEALs watched in silence. The medic had just taken a sniper shot most professionals would hesitate to attempt. Within minutes, they stormed the building. But something else was unfolding. Sloan saw Rain step outside and speak quietly into his personal device. 9 seconds. Confirmation. The traitor had revealed himself. She walked to the doorway holding the signal scanner. Senior Chief, she said calmly. You transmitted again. Rain's hand moved toward his weapon, and a rifle shot from the distant ridge shattered the device in his hand. Shaw, still fighting despite his wound. Rains froze. The truth had finally arrived. And moments later, Commander Voss handed Sloan a worn brown envelope. Inside was a CIA report. It explained everything. Her father's mission, his betrayal, and the name of the man responsible. Decker Rains. Why did Sloan pull the trigger when the man who betrayed her father sat helpless on the floor? Inside the stone building, the air felt heavy with everything that had finally surfaced. Rains sat against the wall. Broken. 10 years of guilt draining out of him all at once. They had leverage, he said quietly. At first it was small information, then bigger. Then one day they asked for something that would get someone killed. Sloane stood across the room. My father's name was Daniel Harker. Silence. Then Viktor Volkov spoke. You have his eyes. For the next 10 minutes, he told them the truth. Daniel Harker had been one of the best intelligence assets he had ever handled. Brilliant, patient, honorable. Volkov had tried to warn him before the network collapsed. But someone inside the American system had compromised the communication. Raines had been the leak, but not the architect. Someone higher had decided Daniel Harker knew too much. The room absorbed the weight of that truth. Sloane's face never changed. Then suddenly, McCreary collapsed beside the door. A hidden wound. Blood pouring from his thigh. Sloane moved instantly. Tourniquet. Pressure. Gauze. Her hands worked with total focus. Saving a life. Even now. Even after everything she had learned. McCreary looked at her through the pain. You good, Doc? She nodded slightly. Across the room, Commander Voss watched her. And in that moment, he understood something about Sloane Harker that few people ever learn about another human being. She carried pain like a soldier, but she chose compassion like a healer. When the helicopter finally arrived at dawn, the wounded were loaded first. Raines was taken into custody. Volkov was secured. And Sloane knelt, one last time in the dirt, holding pressure on McCreary's wound. That was when Commander Voss stepped forward, raised his hand, and saluted. Not because of the sniper shot, not because she uncovered the traitor, but because she had faced the man who destroyed her family, and still chose to save someone else. Sometimes the strongest soldiers aren't the ones who fire the final shot. Sometimes they are the ones who refuse to let pain decide who they become. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts. Why did Sloane Harker lie awake that night staring at the ceiling, even after the mission report was finished? Most soldiers slept hard after returning from the mountains. 3 days of cold air, thin oxygen, and constant alertness usually drained the body enough to erase thought. But Sloane lay on her narrow bunk at Bagram, staring into the dim glow of a single overhead light. Her body was exhausted. Her mind was. Something about the mission hadn't settled into place. During the patrol through Kunar Valley, she had done what she always did: observe quietly, record everything. It was a habit her father had built into her long before she wore a uniform. Information cost nothing. Ignoring it sometimes cost everything. The small details replayed in her mind like pieces of a puzzle, turning slowly in the dark. Ward McCreary's altitude headache. The 14 fighters moving along an unlisted trail. Senior Chief Raines' silence after she treated the infection in his calf. And the strange way Chief Cullen Shaw had been watching her since the moment she walked into the briefing room. Not suspicious, just attentive, as if he was waiting for something he hadn't seen yet. Sloane rolled onto her side. The photograph of her father rested inside the inner pocket of her jacket, hanging beside the bunk. She didn't take it out. She didn't need to. Daniel Harker's face was burned into her memory down to the smallest detail. The winter blue eyes, the quiet smile, the patient stillness that had made him feel immovable when she was a child. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was 10 years old again, standing in the cold field outside Fayetteville. Slow, her father said. The rifle felt heavy in her hands. Steady. Her breathing trembled. Sure. The shot cracked across the empty field and struck the steel plate with a sharp ringing sound. She remembered turning to him with excitement. He had only nodded. Proud, but calm. He never celebrated a good shot, because to him the skill wasn't impressive. The discipline behind it was. Sloane opened her eyes again and looked at the ceiling. Across the base, helicopters were starting their early morning flights. The sound vibrated faintly through the building. Sleep still didn't come, because something else had surfaced in her memory. During the patrol briefing 3 days earlier, Senior Chief Rains had set his rifle on the table to reach for a map. In that moment, Sloane's fingers had lifted slightly from her lap. A reflex, almost reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. She had stopped herself immediately. But someone had noticed. She knew because when she looked up she saw Shaw watching. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't reacted. He had simply filed the moment away. Just like she would have. Sloane exhaled slowly. There were people on that team who saw more than they said. And that meant the quiet balance inside the group was shifting. She finally slept sometime near dawn. But when she woke 6 hours later, there was a message waiting on her communications terminal. A short one. Report to conference room C at 1800. No unit. No name. No explanation. Just a time. Sloane read it twice. Then she stood up and began preparing for whatever came next. Because anonymous orders inside a war zone usually meant one of two things. Someone had made a mistake, or someone wanted a conversation that didn't leave a record. Why did every man in the room fall silent when the civilian walked in? Conference room C was small. A metal table. 5 chairs. Walls covered with faded operational maps. When Sloane arrived at 1755, the rest of the team was already there. Voss sat at the head of the table. Rains leaned back in his chair with arms crossed. McCreary stood near the wall, drinking from a water bottle. Shaw leaned quietly in the corner. No one spoke. The silence felt different from their usual operational quiet. This silence carried curiosity, because none of them had been told what the meeting was about. At exactly 1800, the door opened. The man who entered wasn't wearing a uniform. Early 50s. Medium height. Ordinary face, the kind people forgot quickly. He carried a thin folder and a cup of coffee. When he placed the cup on the table, he moved, with the easy confidence of someone used to being in rooms where nobody else was comfortable. He didn't introduce himself with a name. Instead, he spoke a file number, a clearance level. Then he said calmly, "My name is not relevant to this conversation." Everyone in the room understood immediately. CIA. The man opened his folder and placed 3 photographs on the table. "Viktor Volkov," he said. The images showed a heavy-set man with silver hair. In one photo, he sat at a table in what looked like a restaurant somewhere in Central Asia. "He's a former KGB officer," the man continued, "now operating as a private intelligence broker." Rains leaned forward slightly. "So he sells secrets." "That's one way to describe it." The CIA officer tapped the photograph. "What he currently possesses is a complete list of American intelligence assets operating across Central Asia." The room grew very quiet. If that information reached the wrong buyer, people would die. Not soldiers. Spies. Informants. Families. Entire networks. Voss spoke first. "You want us to extract him?" The man shook his head once. "No." One small word. But it carried finality. "Terminate," Voss said quietly. "The paperwork will follow," the CIA officer replied. "It always did." Sloane looked at the photograph again. Something about Volkov's posture caught her attention. The way his hands rested on the table. the way his shoulders angled toward the unseen person across from him. The quiet focus of someone who spent his life managing other people's secrets. She flipped the photograph over. No one noticed the movement except Shaw. He watched her for a second longer, then looked away. The CIA officer closed his folder. Volkov will meet his buyer in 72 hours. He paused, and he will not leave that meeting alive. Why did Sloane feel a strange unease the moment she saw Volkov's photograph? Later that night, she sat alone outside the barracks reviewing mission notes. A cold desert wind moved through the base. Helicopters passed occasionally overhead. But Sloane's attention remained fixed on one memory that refused to settle. 3 years earlier at Fort Sam Houston, she had accessed a restricted intelligence file late one night. She wasn't supposed to, but curiosity had always been stronger than rules. The document described parts of her father's classified service history. Most of it was redacted, but one phrase had remained visible. Last known handler contact, October 12, 2001. The handler's name had been blacked out. Every version of the file she found contained the same redaction. But the word handler stayed with her. Because intelligence handlers were the people who managed deep cover assets. The people who knew the truth. And the man in the photograph earlier that day. He looked like someone who had spent his life being exactly that kind of person. Sloane rubbed her eyes slowly. Maybe she was imagining connections where none existed. War zones had a way of twisting memory. Still, something inside her mind refused to let the thought go. She stood up and looked across the dark airfield. The mission against Volkov would begin in 48 hours. Whatever answers existed would likely surface there. Until then, Sloane returned to her routine. Equipment checks, medical kit preparation, communications review. Around her, the SEALs prepared with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this work for years. McCreary calibrated breaching charges. Shaw checked his sniper rifle twice. Raines cleaned his weapon with slow mechanical movements. Voss studied terrain maps late into the night. And Sloane prepared the tools she understood best. Bandages, tourniquets, morphine injectors. Because no matter what the mission objective was, her responsibility remained the same. Keep them alive, even if they didn't fully understand who she was yet. Why did Shaw recalibrate his sniper scope 3 times before the mission? The night before deployment, the team gathered outside near the equipment trucks. Stars covered the Afghan sky like scattered glass. Shaw sat quietly on a crate, adjusting his scope again. McCreary laughed. "You've already done that twice." Shaw didn't look up. "Third time makes it right." Raines shook his head. "Scope's fine." "Maybe," Shaw said. "But I don't like surprises." He finally glanced toward Sloane standing nearby, reviewing medical inventory. His expression remained neutral. But something thoughtful passed through his eyes. Because Shaw had seen something the others hadn't. The way Sloane's fingers almost moved toward Raines' rifle during the briefing days earlier. A reflex too fast to fake. Too controlled to be accidental. Shaw had spent most of his life studying people through a sniper scope. And he recognized the quiet posture of someone trained to shoot. He didn't mention it to the team. He simply watched. Sometimes the best way to understand a mystery was to wait until it revealed itself. And something about Sloane Harker told him that moment was coming soon. Very soon. And none of them yet realized that before the next sunrise. A sniper bullet would change the mission. A traitor would be exposed. And the quiet medic they underestimated would reveal the truth about why she had been sent to those mountains in the first place. The kind of truth that didn't just change missions. It changed men. Why did the shot that echoed across the valley change everything about how SEAL Team 3 saw their medic? The mountains of Kunar province had a way of swallowing sound. At night, the darkness pressed in so heavily that even whispers seemed louder than they should be. Wind moved through the narrow valley like a slow breath, sliding along rock walls and disappearing into the distance. Sloan Harker moved through that darkness without hesitation. The team had left their staging position an hour earlier, heading toward the stone building where Viktor Volkov was scheduled to meet a buyer. The terrain forced them into single-file movement along the valley's northern ridge. Shaw led them to his overwatch position. Voss stopped the team near a cluster of broken rocks and scanned the valley through his night optics. "Target structure is 400 meters south," he said quietly over the comms. Sloan crouched behind a rock and adjusted the straps on her medical pack. Her breathing was calm, but her mind was busy. She studied the valley the way she always studied unfamiliar terrain. Every ridge line, every shadow, every angle where someone could hide a rifle. Her father had taught her that habit. "Don't just look where the enemy is," he used to say. "Look where he would want to be." Shaw climbed another 15 meters up the ridge and settled into position with his rifle. From there he could see the entire compound. 2 doors, 3 windows, a small outer building on the east side, 4 armed guards on rotating patrol. He whispered the information into the radio. Overwatch said. The rest of the team waited. Patience was the quiet partner of every successful mission. Minutes passed. Cold air rolled down from the mountain peaks. Then Shaw spoke again. "Thermal confirms Volkov inside." The operation moved into its final stage. Voss gave the order. "Ground team moving." The SEALs advanced slowly toward the building. Sloan followed just behind McCreary. Her eyes moved constantly between the terrain and the men around her. Something about the moment felt fragile, like a balance that could break without warning. And then it did. The gunshot came from somewhere east of the ridge. A single round. Sharp. Precise. Shaw's voice exploded through the comms a second later. "Overwatch down." The word struck the team like sudden cold water. Sloan's head snapped toward the ridge. Shaw lay somewhere above them now. Wounded. Possibly exposed. Without their sniper, the team had lost their eyes. "Shoulder hit," Shaw added through clenched teeth. "I'm alive, but I'm out." The situation changed instantly. Voss didn't hesitate. "Positions." The team dropped behind cover. Sloan slid behind a rock beside McCreary. From their position, she could see movement near the building. Volkov and 2 guards were leaving through the southern entrance. They were heading for the meeting point. If they escaped now, the mission would fail. Voss spoke again, calm but urgent. "We don't have Overwatch." His eyes turned toward Sloan. A quiet calculation passed between them. "Harker," he said, "can you take the shot?" The distance stretched across the valley like a silent challenge. 760 yards. Wind from the northeast. Low moonlight. Sloan already knew the numbers. She had calculated them 20 minutes earlier without realizing why. "Give me 30 seconds, she said. Rains turned toward her. 30 seconds for what? Sloan didn't answer. She dropped her medical pack onto the ground and unzipped a hidden compartment along the bottom. Inside were carefully wrapped components. A barrel, a bolt assembly, a precision scope. McCreary stared. "You're kidding." Sloan assembled the rifle with smooth mechanical speed. The movements carried no hesitation. "Only practice." Rains watched silently, because suddenly, the quiet medic didn't look like a medic anymore. She looked like someone who had done this before. Many times. Within 55 seconds, the weapon was ready. A Macmillan TAC-338. Built for distances like this. Sloane moved up a small shelf of rock that gave her a clearer angle across the valley. She planted the bipod, settled into the scope. Through the lens, the world narrowed into sharp focus. Volkov moved quickly toward the building entrance. One guard held his arm, shielding him from the likely direction of incoming fire. Professional positioning. Smart, but not perfect. Sloane adjusted her breathing. Wind 11 knots. Left correction 8 inches. Downward angle slight. Distance 760 yards. Her father's voice drifted quietly into her memory. Slow. Her heartbeat settled. Steady. She centered the reticle. Sure. The rifle fired. The echo bounced off the valley walls. Through the scope, Sloane knew instantly. The wind had shifted. The round struck stone 18 inches left of the doorway. Volkov and the guard dove behind a low wall. Behind her, the team held their breath. A miss at that distance could destroy confidence. But Sloane didn't react. She cycled the bolt, ejected the spent casing, adjusted the wind correction. Her breathing slowed again. Patience. Her father had always said the second shot mattered more than the first. The guard leaned up from behind the wall. Just for a second. Sloane fired again. The body dropped instantly. Volkov disappeared behind cover. Pinned. From the rocks behind her, the SEALs stared. Not cheering. Not speaking. Just watching the medic who had just made a shot most trained snipers would hesitate to attempt. Sloane disassembled the rifle as calmly as she had assembled it. Packed it away. Then she climbed down from the rock. We need to move, she said quietly. He won't stay down long. No one argued, because something had shifted in the air around them. The woman they had dismissed 3 days earlier was no longer just their medic. And they were beginning to realize they didn't fully understand who she really was. But the sniper shot wasn't the only thing about to change that night. As the team advanced toward the building, Sloane noticed something else. Senior Chief Rains drifting away from the formation. Just slightly. 20 feet around the corner of a small storage shed. At first it looked routine. Operators adjusted position all the time during entry maneuvers. But Sloane had spent the last 3 days watching everyone, studying their movements, their habits, and something about this moment felt wrong. She continued moving with the team. 30 seconds passed. Then she quietly changed direction. From the shadow of the shed she saw him. Rain stood with his back turned, one hand raised to his ear. Not the team radio. A personal device. He spoke for only 9 seconds. Too quietly to hear. But Sloane didn't need the words. Because 6 days earlier, she had found something buried in the satellite communication logs. An 11-second signal. Sent from the same device. On a frequency used by insurgent networks. She had waited for confirmation. Now she had it. Sloane stepped back into the shadows. Her heart didn't race. Her breathing didn't change. But a quiet realization settled into place. The danger tonight wasn't only outside the team. It had been walking beside them since the beginning. And the next few minutes would decide whether the truth surfaced or disappeared forever. Why didn't Sloane report the betrayal the moment she confirmed it? Most soldiers would have. Finding evidence that someone on your team was secretly communicating with the enemy, usually left only one option: report it immediately and let command deal with the consequences. But Sloane Harker didn't speak. Not when she stepped back from the shadow of the shed. Not when she rejoined the formation, moving toward the stone building. And not when Senior Chief Decker Rains returned to the group 30 seconds later like nothing had happened. She simply watched. Because reporting suspicion would have ended the operation instantly. And suspicion wasn't enough for Sloane. She needed certainty. The kind that left no place for anyone to hide. The team advanced toward the compound. From Shaw's position high on the ridge, his voice crackled faintly through the radio despite the pain in his shoulder. 2 guards left side, one moving to the north wall. Even wounded, he was still watching. Still protecting them. Voss signaled the team to spread along the southern wall of the building. McCreary prepared a small breaching charge for the rear entrance. Rains positioned himself near the corner, covering the approach corridor. Sloane knelt beside a stack of supply crates. From the outside, it looked like she was adjusting medical gear. In reality, she pulled a small frequency scanner from her pack. The screen lit softly in the darkness. And there it was. The signal again. Short. Unencrypted. Originating less than 10 meters away. Rain's device. Sloane stared at the glowing numbers for a long moment. Confirmation. The truth settled quietly into place. The man standing 20 feet away had been feeding information to someone outside the team. The question was if any more. The question was why. She closed the scanner and stood up. "Senior Chief," she said calmly. Rains turned. She held the device up just enough for him to see the frequency display. The moment lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds, where his expression shifted through several emotions faster than words could describe. Recognition, calculation, and finally acceptance. "You saw the signal," he said quietly. "6 days ago," Sloane replied, "and again 20 seconds ago." His right hand started moving toward his weapon. The rifle shot came from the ridge before he finished the motion. The bullet struck the device in his hand, shattering it into fragments of plastic and metal. Rains froze in shock. Over the radio, Shaw's calm voice followed a second later. Device neutralized. Even wounded and lying on a mountain slope, the sniper had been watching. Ready. Waiting for the moment he understood. Rains slowly looked down at the broken pieces in his hand. Then he looked at Sloane. The room inside the building rearranged itself instantly. McCreary stepped forward and took position beside Rains. Voss watched everything with the expression of a man whose quiet suspicions had just been confirmed. No one raised their voices. No one rushed. The truth had already done the work. Rains lowered his hand slowly. "I need to go," he said. "No," Voss replied. McCreary gently removed his weapon. Rains didn't resist. The fight had left him before it even started. Why had Commander Voss been carrying a sealed envelope for 8 months? Once the situation stabilized, Voss walked across the room toward Sloane. From the inside pocket of his plate carrier, he removed a worn brown envelope. The paper looked old. The corners softened from being handled too many times. He held it for a moment before handing it to her. "I've been carrying this for 8 months, he said quietly. "I was told to give it to you if the mission went sideways." Sloane looked at the envelope. Then at him. "What is it?" Voss hesitated. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "That part's on me." She opened the seal. Inside was a photocopied intelligence report. CIA. Dated November 2001. Several lines were blacked out with heavy redactions. But the visible text was enough. Asset Harker 7, Daniel J. Harker. Her father. Sloan read slowly. Operational compromise confirmed. Exfiltration failure, October 14, 2001. Tora Bora region. Then the line that froze the air in the room. Cause, internal communication breach. Below the typed report, someone had written a handwritten note in dark ink. 4 simple words. I tried to warn him. Sloan didn't move. She stood there, reading the document again. Then once more. 12 seconds passed. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Because everyone in the room understood that something much larger than the current mission had just surfaced. Sloan folded the document carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then she handed it to Voss. Her voice was calm. Where'd Volkov? Voss blinked slightly at the abrupt shift. He's secured in the back room, he said. The buyer is still expected within 2 hours. Sloan picked up her medical kit and slung it over her shoulder. Then we're not done yet. Behind her, McCreary watched quietly. Raines sat against the wall, silent now. The past had finally caught up to him. Voss spoke again. Sloan. She paused near the door. Your father was my friend. The words hung in the air. For 2 seconds she didn't turn around. Then she nodded slightly. I know. And she stepped outside into the cold Afghan night. The darkness outside felt heavier than before. The mountains loomed like black walls against the sky. Sloan moved down the slope without waiting for instructions. Behind her she heard footsteps. 3 men following. Exactly the spacing she would have chosen. Voss on the left. McCreary on the right. Shaw limping slightly but still moving. No one asked where she was going. Because sometimes leadership revealed itself without rank. And in that moment, they all understood something simple. Sloan Harker knew more about what was happening than any of them. Up ahead, somewhere in the valley, Viktor Volkov's meeting was still scheduled to happen. The buyer was still coming. And now the mission had changed again. Because the man who knew the truth about Daniel Harker's death was still alive. And Sloan intended to hear that truth herself. But before they reached the meeting point, something else waited in the darkness. Raines was gone. Somewhere between the building and the tree line he had slipped away. And the man who had betrayed Sloan's father 10 years earlier was now running through the mountains. Running toward the same meeting point. Running toward the only person who might still protect him. The hunt had just begun. And this time, Sloan wasn't just a medic following orders. She was a daughter walking toward the truth. Why did Sloan take the narrow mountain pass instead of the main trail when she began tracking Raines through the darkness? Most soldiers would have followed the obvious route. The main trail curved along the valley floor toward the abandoned trading house where Volkov's buyer was expected to arrive. It was wider, easier to move through, and familiar to the team from their earlier reconnaissance. But Sloan didn't go that way. She stopped at the edge of the tree line and studied the black outline of the mountains. Raines had a head start. Maybe 3 minutes. Maybe less. But Sloan had spent 3 days watching him move through the terrain. She knew his stride length, the way he favored the outside of his left foot because of an old ankle injury. The pace he used when he needed to move quickly but quietly. And she knew something else. Raines wasn't running blindly. He was running toward the same destination as them. Viktor Volkov's meeting point, which meant he would choose the fastest path. Sloan's eyes shifted to the northern wall of the valley. A narrow break in the rock cut diagonally through the slope like a scar. Most people would ignore it. Too tight. Too steep. but Sloane remembered seeing it during the satellite imagery review before the mission. A hidden pass. If someone moved through it carefully, it could shave nearly 8 minutes off the approach. 8 minutes in combat wasn't just time. It was opportunity. She stepped toward it without speaking. Behind her, Voss noticed the change in direction. "You're cutting the ridge," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he will." That was enough explanation. The team followed. The pass closed around them like a stone corridor. Sharp rock pressed close on both sides. Loose gravel shifted under their boots. Sloane moved first, angling her shoulders through the narrow gaps with steady patience. The cold mountain air carried almost no sound. Just the faint scrape of boots against stone. Behind her, McCreary muttered softly, "Next time, we choose the path that doesn't try to kill us." Shaw gave a quiet laugh despite the pain in his shoulder. But Sloane kept moving. Her mind was already several minutes ahead. Because catching Rains wasn't the real objective. Understanding what had happened to her father was. The two questions had finally collided. And somewhere ahead in the dark, both answers waited. They emerged from the pass onto a rocky ledge, overlooking the exchange point. The building below looked ancient. A squat stone structure half buried in the earth, as if the mountain itself had grown around it. 3 windows. 2 doors. 4 armed guards walking a slow patrol around the perimeter. Shaw raised his binoculars. "Movement south side," he whispered. Sloane followed his gaze. "Rains." He was 60 meters from the building and closing fast. Still running. Still trying to reach the meeting. Voss checked his watch. "We've got 90 seconds before he reaches that door." Sloane scanned the compound quickly. Her mind worked through possibilities like pieces on a chessboard. Guard positions. Entry points. Angles of fire. In 30 seconds she had a plan. She spoke quietly. "Shaw takes the ridge above us." He nodded immediately. Even injured, he could still cover the perimeter. "McCreary," she continued. "Small charge on the east wall, just noise and flash." "Distraction," he said. "Exactly." Voss enters through the north door when the charge goes. Voss studied her for a second, then nodded. "And you?" he asked. "I'll take the south entrance." The one Rains was about to reach. No one argued. Some plans didn't need discussion. 90 seconds passed quickly. Sloane crouched in the shadows near the southern doorway. Her sidearm rested steady in her hands. Inside the building she could hear faint voices. Volkov. His remaining guards. Outside, the patrol continued its slow rotation. Sloane's breathing slowed. The same rhythm she had learned as a child, standing beside her father in that empty field. 4 seconds in. Hold. Release. Then Shaw's rifle cracked from the ridge above. One guard dropped instantly. The other 3 turned toward the sound. At that exact moment, McCreary's charge detonated on the eastern wall. The explosion wasn't large, but the flash and pressure wave pulled every eye in the wrong direction. Voss and McCreary stormed through the north entrance. Gunfire erupted inside. Short. Controlled. Professional. And then the south door burst open. Rains stepped inside at a run. And stopped. Sloane stood 2 meters away. Her pistol aimed directly at his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the fight in the next room faded as the rest of the team secured the building. Rains looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man who had been running from something for a very long time. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," he said quietly. "I figured it out 6 days ago," Sloane replied. He gave a small, tired laugh. The SATCOM logs. Yes. And you didn't report it. No. Why? Sloane's eyes didn't leave his. Because reporting it would have ended the mission. And letting it continue ended me. Exactly. Footsteps approached behind him as Voss entered the room. McCreary close behind. Raines glanced at them. Then back at Sloane. The whole time, he said softly. The whole time. She lowered the pistol slightly, but didn't holster it. My father's name was Daniel Harker. The words landed in the room like a weight. Raines closed his eyes for a moment. I know. He died in October 2001. Yes. Because someone told the wrong people where he would be. Silence filled the space. Then Raines slowly sank down against the wall and sat on the floor. They had leverage, he said quietly. In 1999 I made a mistake, something small, something stupid. His voice sounded older now, worn down by years of guilt. They told me if I didn't cooperate they'd expose it, end my career, my life. And the small information turned into bigger information. He nodded slowly. Until one day, they asked for something that would get someone killed. Sloane didn't blink. That someone was my father. Yes. Before anyone could speak again, a voice came from the doorway behind them. You have his eyes. Everyone turned. Viktor Volkov stood calmly in the hallway. Hands restrained. But his posture carried the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades surrounded by dangerous people. He studied Sloane carefully. The same winter color, he said softly. Daniel's daughter. Sloane stared at him. You knew him. For 22 months, Volkov replied. He was one of the best assets I ever handled. The room fell silent again. Because suddenly, the mission had transformed into something else. Something personal. Volkov continued. In September 2001, I detected a compromise in the network around your father. You tried to warn him, Sloane said quietly. Volkov nodded once. Yes. But the communication channel was monitored. He glanced briefly toward Raines. The leak was already inside. Raines stared at the floor. Volkov's voice softened. Your father understood before the end. I believe he knew what had happened. Sloane's jaw tightened slightly. He died thinking about you, Volkov added. That was when McCreary suddenly sucked in a sharp breath. Sloane turned instantly. Blood soaked through his pant leg. A hidden gunshot wound high in his thigh. He had been hiding it during the entire breach. She was beside him in seconds. Tourniquet. Pressure. Gauze. Her hands moved with flawless speed. Focused. Precise. Raines watched silently from the floor. The daughter of the man he betrayed was saving another man's life without hesitation. Even now. Even after learning the truth. Voss watched too. And in that moment, he understood something about Sloane Harker that went far beyond skill. Pain had shaped her, but it hadn't hardened her. Because the strongest part of her wasn't the sniper rifle. It wasn't the intelligence. It was the choice she kept making again and again. To heal, even when the world had given her every reason not to. Outside, the mountains were beginning to pale with the first light of dawn. And before the sun rose, one final moment would unfold on that battlefield. The moment that would make a seasoned commander raise his hand in salute to a medic kneeling in the dirt. Why did the room fall silent when Viktor Volkov said the words, "He died thinking about you"? For a moment, no one moved. The old stone building seemed to hold its breath around them, Dust drifted slowly through the thin beam of moonlight coming from the cracked window. Outside, the mountains remained dark and indifferent, the way they had been long before any of them arrived. Sloane Harker knelt on the floor beside Ward McCreary. Blood soaked through the torn fabric of his tactical pants, spreading across the stone beneath him. The wound was deep, high in the thigh, dangerously close to the femoral artery. A few minutes more, and the situation would have turned fatal. But Sloane's hands moved with quiet precision. Tourniquet tightened. Combat gauze packed deep into the wound. Direct pressure applied with the full weight of her body. Her face showed no hesitation, no anger, no sign that the words Volkov had just spoken had landed anywhere inside her. But the men around her knew better. Commander Voss watched her carefully. Because the moment Volkov spoke about Daniel Harker, something invisible had shifted in the air. Not outwardly. Sloane's posture remained steady. Her voice remained calm. But there was a deeper stillness inside her now. The kind that forms when a question carried for years finally receives its answer. McCreary grimaced through the pain. "You good, Doc," he muttered. Sloane glanced up briefly. "You're losing blood faster than I'd like," she said, "but you'll live if you stay quiet." He gave a weak grin. Comforting. Behind them, Raines still sat on the floor against the wall. His rifle gone. His hands empty. He hadn't tried to run again. Hadn't argued. Hadn't begged. Because now that the truth was spoken out loud, there was nowhere left for him to hide. For 10 years he had carried the weight of a decision that destroyed a man's life. Now he was sitting in front of that man's daughter. And she wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't even looking at him. She was saving someone else's life. Raines lowered his head slowly. "I never meant for it to go that far," he said quietly. No one answered. Not because they hadn't heard him. Because the sentence didn't change anything. Volkov stood near the doorway, watching the scene unfold with the calm detachment of someone who had spent decades studying human nature. "Daniel was not a man easily broken," he said softly. Sloane finished securing the bandage and finally looked up. Her eyes met his. "You said you tried to warn him." "Yes." "What exactly happened?" Volkov folded his restrained hands in front of him. "In intelligence work," he said carefully, "compromises rarely happen suddenly. They begin as patterns." He glanced briefly toward Raines. "In September 2001, I began seeing signals inside the network surrounding your father. Communications delayed, information reaching the wrong ears. So you sent a warning." "Yes." "Through the back channel we reserved for emergencies." "And it never arrived." "No." Volkov's voice remained calm, but there was something genuine in his expression now. "Regret. I learned later the channel had been monitored." He nodded slightly toward Raines. The leak had already begun. Raines' shoulders tightened. But he didn't argue, because denying it now would be pointless. Volkov continued. "Your father understood the situation before the end." Sloane's voice was quiet. "How?" Volkov's gaze drifted briefly toward the cracked window, where the first pale light of dawn had begun touching the mountains. "Men like Daniel Harker don't need explanations," he said. "They recognize patterns." He paused. The last message he sent before the extraction attempt contained only 3 words. Sloane's breath caught slightly despite herself. "What words?" Volkov looked at her. "Slow, steady, sure." The same words carved into the underside of the old Remington rifle. The same words her father had repeated every Saturday morning. The same words she had whispered, before firing the sniper rifle earlier that night. For the first time since opening the envelope earlier, Sloane closed her eyes. Just for a second. And in that second the field outside Fayetteville returned. Her father standing behind her. His quiet voice correcting her stance. His calm patience as she learned to breathe through the trigger pull. Then the moment passed. Sloane opened her eyes again. The battlefield returned. McCreary shifted weakly beside her. "You gonna tell me what I missed?" he asked. She gave a faint, tired smile. "Later." Commander Voss stepped forward then. For a long moment, he simply looked at Sloane. At the woman kneeling on the floor holding pressure on a wounded soldier. The daughter of the man he had once served beside. Finally he spoke. "Evac Bird will be here in 12 minutes. Sloane nodded. "That's enough time." She adjusted the bandage again. Checked the pulse in McCreary's ankle. Still strong. Still steady. Across the room Raines watched quietly. After a long silence he spoke again. "I thought if I kept working, if I kept doing good missions, it might balance the scales." Sloane didn't look up. "There isn't a scale," she said. The words weren't harsh. Just honest. Raines swallowed. "What happens to me now?" Voss answered before Sloane could. "You'll be taken back to base." "Court-martial." "Yes." Raines nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing else. Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo faintly through the valley. The evacuation bird. McCreary exhaled in relief. "Never thought I'd be so happy to hear that sound." Sloane tightened the tourniquet one final time. "You'll complain about it again in a week." He laughed softly. "Probably." A few minutes later the helicopter touched down on the ridge above the building. Wind from the rotors swept dust and loose gravel across the ground. The team carried McCreary out first. Sloane walked beside the stretcher, one hand still pressing firmly against the wound to keep the bleeding controlled. The med crew pulled him aboard. Sloane climbed up after them. But before the helicopter lifted off, Commander Voss stepped forward. For a moment he simply looked at her. The mountains stretched behind them. The battlefield still cold and silent in the early dawn. Then Voss straightened his posture, raised his hand, and saluted. Not because she had taken the impossible sniper shot. Not because she uncovered the traitor in their ranks. But because she had stood face to face with the man who helped destroy her family. And still chose to save someone else. Sloane looked at him for a second. Then she returned the salute quietly. The helicopter lifted into the pale morning sky. Below them, the mountains of Cunard grew smaller. And somewhere in the distance, a long chapter of unfinished questions finally began to close. Because the truth about Daniel Harker had finally been spoken. But the legacy he left behind had never been about vengeance. It had always been about something simpler. Something stronger. Competence. Patience. And the quiet strength to do the right thing, even when the world gave you every reason not to. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't demand recognition. Sometimes it kneels in the dirt with blood on its hands and refuses to quit. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.